"Stay down where you belong," he said. She stood up and took over. "Stay down where you belong," he said. The words cut through the operations center like a blade scraping metal. Low enough to humiliate, loud enough to carry across 40 feet of climate-controlled air and open-plan workstations to every person in the room. Master Chief Gerald Hartley didn't raise his voice. He never needed to. 33 years in the Navy had given him the kind of authority that doesn't require volume, that settles into a room before the man does, the way pressure changes before a storm. He stood 6'2", chest ribbons stacked 4 rows deep. Silver Star, 2 Bronze Stars with Valor, a combat action ribbon that most men in this room would never earn. A NATO medal he'd stopped explaining because the explanation required a classification that made people uncomfortable. His arms crossed the way a man crosses his arms when he owns not just this forward operating base on the western edge of Oahu, but every mile of Pacific Ocean surrounding it. Behind him, 11 Marine advisors and 4 visiting intelligence liaisons had stopped whatever they were doing. Some grinned. Some studied the floor. A few glanced at each other with the careful expressions of men who have learned that what they do with their faces in moments like this becomes part of their reputation. The woman he'd spoken to did not react. She was sitting at the secondary terminal in the far corner of the room, compact, somewhere in her early 30s. Regulation bun pulled back so tight it would have given most people a headache. Plain Navy work uniform with no rank insignia on the collar. The sleeves were rolled exactly 2 inches above the wrist, precisely regulation. Her face was calm in the way a surface is calm before something enormous moves beneath it. She had a fitness tech watch on her left wrist, civilian-looking, matte black, the kind you could buy at any airport, the kind no one thinks twice about confiscating because it doesn't look like anything worth confiscating. Her name tag read, Chen J. Her hands hadn't stopped moving. She was running a systems diagnostic on the base's secure communications array, inputting a monthly authentication sequence, 47 characters, alphanumeric, rotating, at a speed that made no visible sense to anyone who understood what she was doing. Most operators took 4 to 5 minutes on that sequence. The sequence existed to prevent brute force entry, and it worked because human beings under pressure make errors and have to back up and try again. Her hands completed it in under 9 seconds. 0 errors. She pressed enter and returned to the next screen before anyone watching had fully processed what they'd seen. In the northeast corner of the room, near the doorway that opened onto the logistics corridor, Chief Warrant Officer Samuel Briggs was pretending to do paperwork. He was 61 years old, 37 years of service, most of it in places that don't appear on official rosters, in assignments that don't show up on standard service records, working alongside people whose names he still could not speak aloud. He had the lean, carefully maintained look of a man who has had too little sleep in too many time zones to let himself get soft. His hair was gray at the temples and white everywhere else. His face was a record, not a map, not a document, but a record in the way a cliff face is a record, layer by layer, event by event, each one compressed and permanent. He'd been holding a pen. He'd been taking notes about something that he could no longer remember because his pen had stopped moving the moment her hands finished the authentication sequence. Something about this woman. He couldn't place it yet. But it was there, a recognition that hadn't found its word yet. The way you recognize a song before you remember its name. "I asked you a question," Hartley said, stepping closer to her workstation. His shadow fell across her keyboard in the left half of her screen. "Technician, what's your clearance level, and who specifically authorized your access to this terminal?" She completed one more keystroke. Then she looked up. Her eyes were dark and level, and contained the specific quality of someone who is not performing patience, who simply has it, structurally, as a feature of how they are built. "My clearance is current and verified," she said. "You can pull it from the terminal if you have the access level to read it." A ripple moved through the room, not quite laughter. Something more like the anticipation of laughter, the intake of breath before the exhale. Someone near the back of the group made a sound that was almost a snort and converted it quickly into a cough. "I don't pull files," Hartley said. His voice had dropped to a register that the room had to lean toward to hear, which was exactly what he wanted. "I ask people directly, and when I ask, people answer." "Then ask properly," she said, and returned to her screen. The room went quiet in a different way now. The kind of quiet that makes people check exits. Hartley's jaw tightened. His eyes went flat in that particular manner of a man, recalibrating from condescension to something more deliberate. He stepped forward and placed both hands flat on the edge of her desk. Close enough that his shadow deepened across her keyboard, close enough that the gesture could not be misread as casual. "You have approximately 10 seconds, he said, with the careful quiet of a man who knows that quiet is louder than shouting when you have 30 years of rank behind it, "to explain to me what a contractor technician with no visible rank is doing at a classified communications array in my operations center, before I have you formally escorted off this installation and your credentials flagged for review." She controlled her breathing. 4 counts in, hold 4. 4 counts out, hold 4. The rhythm she had practiced so many times in so many worse places than this, that it now required no thought. It ran like a machine, underneath everything, keeping the surface level. Then she said, 13. He blinked. "Excuse me?" "You said 10 seconds. You've been standing there for 13. I was curious whether you'd notice." She met his eyes for exactly 1 beat. Then she went back to her work. Behind him, in the room, someone made a sound that might have been a cough and was not. In the northeast corner, Briggs's pen remained still. By 1400, the story had evolved. In the mess hall telling, she had gotten mouthy. In the version circulating through the base's group messaging channels by 1530, she had laughed at him. By the time dinner service was fully underway, the story had her calling Hartley something that, if accurate, would have ended her career and possibly her freedom within 20 minutes. None of it was true. But accuracy had never been the point. The point was that a woman with no visible rank had spoken back to Hartley, and the story needed a shape that made Hartley's response feel proportionate. And so the story grew to fit the need. She ate alone, tray of institutional protein in one compartment, carbohydrate in another, coffee black and unremarkable. A maintenance log she held open with one hand and read with the particular attention of someone memorizing rather than reviewing. From where she sat, at the far end of the hall's longest table with her back to the wall and sight lines to every entrance and exit, she was doing something that looked like isolation and was something else entirely. She tracked which men deferred to which others without being asked. She tracked who stood when Hartley entered versus who looked up but stayed seated. She tracked the informal power, who got served first, who sat closest to the exit, whose conversation stopped when someone approached. She was building a map. She'd been building it since she arrived on this installation 12 days ago, and it was almost complete. On her left wrist, the watch ran silently. At 15:17, she was back at the secondary terminal. The operations center had thinned to 8 people in the late afternoon lull before the evening shift rotation. At 15:19, Sergeant First Class Alan Kovach, 27, Hartley's most trusted intelligence advisor, the kind of face that had never yet been wrong about anything, and therefore had never had to learn what to do when it was, leaned against the wall beside her workstation, and said, conversationally, as though he were commenting on weather, "You should know that he's already filed a verification inquiry. Your credentials are being formally reviewed." She didn't look up. "I know. That generally concerns people in your position." "I don't doubt it. You don't seem concerned." "I'm not," she said. He waited. She did not elaborate. She returned to her screen. He eventually moved on, which was what she'd known he would do. At 1600, she signed out a maintenance tag for the equipment bay and spent 40 minutes field stripping a disassembled M110 semi-automatic sniper rifle that had been sitting on the secondary rack with a notation of mechanical failure on the checkout sheet from 2 days prior. She worked in the specific silence of someone for whom these motions exist far below the level of conscious thought. The silence of absolute trained fluency. The way a pianist's hands know the keys before the mind gives the instruction. The angle of her wrists. The spacing of her fingers. The order of component separation. The handling of the barrel assembly. She worked without hesitation, without backtracking, without the 2-second pause that even experienced armory personnel insert between components while memory catches up to motion. Chief Warrant Officer Briggs, passing through the equipment bay on his way to the vehicle depot, stopped in the doorway. He stood there for 40 seconds. The grip, the specific angle of the left hand on the receiver assembly. He had seen that grip before, had seen it described in a classified training manual he'd read in 2019, in a compartmented briefing about a special operations qualification program that had since been reclassified to a level above his clearance. The program's existence was known to him. Its graduates were not. He had never been able to confirm whether he'd ever been in the same room as one. He walked past without speaking. He didn't enter anything in his log. He held the image in his chest like a stone he'd picked up on a beach, solid and specific and wordless, turning it over, not yet knowing the full weight of why he'd kept it. At 1723, during a base-wide formation review for incoming rotation personnel, she stood in her assigned position with the correctness of someone who has stood in 10,000 formations. When the reviewing officer called for right face and she executed the movement, her left sleeve rode up approximately 2 inches. The tattoo on her inner forearm was visible for 4 seconds before she lowered her arm to her side. Briggs, standing at the formation's margin with his hands clasped behind his back, position giving him clear sight lines to the second rank, saw it. His body made no visible response. His hands stayed clasped. His expression didn't shift. But something behind his eyes went very quiet and very focused. The way things go quiet and focused when a long-running pattern finally resolves into a single coherent image. The tattoo was not decorative. It was not personal. It was a classified insignia, a design that meant nothing to a person who didn't know what they were looking for, and meant something specific and serious to someone who did. He had seen that specific design once, in a classified briefing in 2019, on a slide that had been removed from the presentation package before copies were distributed. He had not been meant to see it for long enough to memorize it. He had an excellent memory. He did not speak. He filed the image in the same internal drawer as the authentication speed and the grip and the absolute stillness under Hartley's provocation. The drawer was getting full. The picture it was building had an outline he did not like. At 1800, Hartley made it formal. He announced the credential suspension in the operations corridor in front of 9 people, with the full deliberateness of a man who wanted this witnessed and entered into the record of this installation's operational narrative. Her access card, her base ID, a secondary document she'd been carrying, all of it was to be surrendered pending a verification hold. Standard protocol allowed 48 hours. She produced her badge, her card, and a folded document from the inner pocket of her uniform. She held the document out toward him. He took it. He unfolded it. He read the first 2 lines, and something moved across his face. Not fear yet, not quite. But the thing that precedes fear when a man who has never been wrong about his own authority encounters something that suggests an error in a calculation he made a long time ago. He folded the document. He held it. "This doesn't clear you," he said. "This delays the process." "That's fine," she said. "Take whatever time you need." She walked away, boots quiet on concrete. In the junction at the corridor's far end, Briggs watched Hartley stare at the folded document in his hand. Watched Hartley's jaw work once, twice, testing words he decided not to speak. Watched Hartley look up and scan the corridor for something, for an explanation maybe, for a way to fit what he'd just read into the version of this situation he'd been operating from since morning. She had already turned the corner and was gone. Briggs went back to his office. He sat down. He pulled out the formation report he was supposed to be completing. He stared at it for a long time without writing anything. Then he looked up at the wall, where nothing was written, and he started putting things in order in his mind. Every detail, in sequence, from the moment he'd first seen her hands on that authentication sequence 2 days ago. The grip, the scar he'd noticed once on her right forearm, jagged, irregular, the kind that comes from shrapnel in a confined space, not from a clean surgical environment. The way she sat in a room, back to the wall, sight lines maintained, exits tracked. The posture of someone for whom environmental awareness is not a habit but a reflex. The breathing, 4 count, controlled, deployed under pressure, with the casualness of a person who has been using it in genuine emergencies long enough that it has become involuntary. He was not certain yet, but he was almost certain. And the thing he was almost certain of frightened him, specifically because of what it implied about Hartley. The holding room was 12 feet by 8 feet. Concrete walls, poured gray beige, the color of no particular intention. A metal bench bolted to the left wall, painted the same institutional color as every other surface in the room. A window near the ceiling, a horizontal slot, maybe 8 inches tall by 18 inches wide, showing a strip of evening sky that had gone from amber to dark purple to the deep flat blue that comes just before stars fully resolve. The smell of industrial disinfectant in a losing contest with something older and more honest. Machine oil, stress, the particular residue of a room that is used for a particular purpose that is never pleasant. They had taken her access card, her badge, the maintenance log. They had not taken the watch. Nobody ever took the watch. That was something she had known they would not do when she'd requisitioned it through a supply channel that did not connect to her name 3 months ago, from a logistics contact who understood that the important thing about the watch was that it looked like something that was not important. This is the near-fail moment, the point where anyone watching from the outside would say it's over, contained, neutralized, identity at risk of exposure in the wrong direction. Except what happened in this operations center today was not a trap closing around her. It was a mechanism completing its first operational cycle. Every official action Hartley took, the credential challenge, the verification inquiry, the access suspension, the detention order, was a step he initiated, and every step was a trigger she had anticipated, because she had spent 4 weeks studying exactly the kind of man who takes exactly those steps when he feels threatened by something he cannot immediately categorize. He had been doing her work for her since 0900, and he would finish it. She looked at the watch. 1843. In 21 minutes, her missed check-in signal would register at the oversight cell at Joint Special Operations Command. The compartmented cell that had deployed her to this installation under a classified authorization above the access level of every person on this base, including Hartley. The missed signal, by protocol, would not generate a page. It would generate a dispatch. The oversight cell's response to a missed signal from an active Black Bear deployment was not a phone call. It was people in vehicles. In 57 minutes, an automated file transfer she had staged over the previous 4 weeks would execute from the secondary terminal. The package contained 4 categories of material: signals intelligence captured from the base's outgoing encrypted channels, cross-referenced against known civilian contractor routing paths; financial transfer records connecting a Bermuda-registered consulting firm, incorporated 2021, dormant, reactivated 2023, to 6 classified contract award decisions that exceeded normal procurement authorization; a personnel timeline connecting Hartley to the operational planning sessions that preceded each of 4 missions whose operators had died in incidents classified as equipment failure, and a biometric record confirming his presence at a location he had not reported being at. In a year, he had reported being elsewhere. 4 operators. Their families had been told the deaths were accidents. One family, a father in Pensacola, Florida, a daughter in the Navy, a wife who had been waiting 2 years for an answer that didn't arrive, had filed 3 separate inquiries that had been redirected and closed. She had met the father once, before this deployment, in a conference room in Virginia. He was 64 and had the face of a man who had stopped hoping without stopping trying, which was one of the hardest faces she had ever been in a room with. She had told him she was working on it. She had not told him what that meant. In approximately 2 hours, Hartley was going to learn the difference between the authority rank grants and the authority purpose builds. She controlled her breathing. 4 in, hold 4, 4 counts out, hold 4. The strip of sky above the window showed 2 stars now. She noted them without attachment, filed them, released them. She had been designed, through years of practice and occasional extremity, for exactly this. For the specific discipline of doing nothing when the moment has not yet come, of holding all of it in perfect stillness, of trusting the architecture of a plan over the noise of the waiting. The watch ticked. She waited. At 20:41, the door at the far end of the operations corridor opened. Not the side door. The main door, pressure-sealed, independently powered, magnetic lock requiring 2-factor authentication to release from outside. That door had not been activated after 2,000 hours in the current operational cycle. Its opening made a sound that Briggs, working alone in the logistics office 40 feet away, heard the way certain sounds are heard, not with the ear exactly, but with the part of the body that has learned over decades to pay attention before the brain knows why. He went to the window. 4 vehicles. Black, unmarked, military plates with a prefix code he recognized as Pentagon Tier. The kind of vehicles that do not appear on installations without prior coordination with Base Command. Hartley was Base Command tonight. Hartley had not been notified. Briggs could tell because he could see Hartley through the operations center glass, and Hartley was reaching for his desk phone with the specific posture of a man receiving information that does not fit the version of events he has been managing. Out of the 4 vehicles, 12 people emerged in the late base lighting. 8 wore service dress, the kind of dress blues worn to congressional briefings or formal proceedings, not to social calls. 3 wore civilian clothes with the posture and positioning of people who had once worn uniforms and never fully stopped. The 12th was a woman Briggs had seen once before, in a photograph, in a compartmented briefing in 2019. A briefing he'd signed an NDA to attend that was still, technically, active. Rear Admiral Christine Park, officially retired. in the way that certain retirements are a different category of active. Briggs was already moving. He had been building this picture for 2 days, and now all the pieces were in alignment, and the alignment pointed only one direction. He moved from the logistics office to the holding room corridor, taking the shorter route past the communications alcove, and he knocked on the holding room door twice, with the particular cadence of a military knock that conveys urgency without emergency. A pause. Then, busy. "Chief Warrant Officer Briggs," he said, "I want you to know that people are arriving at this installation who will change the temperature of this situation very quickly. I'd recommend we go and be present for that." A longer pause. Then, "Open it." The duty officer standing behind Briggs looked at him. Briggs looked at the duty officer with an expression that communicated, without requiring words, that the right choice was the simple one, and that the simple choice was the door. The duty officer opened the door. She walked out without hurrying. She looked at Briggs for one moment, not gratitude exactly, but the acknowledgement that passes between people who are operating in the same truth. She started down the corridor. "I saw the authentication speed," Briggs said, walking beside her. "Day 1, and the grip in the equipment bay, and the formation review." She walked. "I'd already put it together before tonight," he said. "I want you to know I would have said something if it had become necessary." She stopped. She looked at him. "Why didn't you?" He thought about this for 1 step's worth of silence. "Because I thought you'd already calculated that it was better this way." She looked at him for another moment. Then she walked on. He followed. She came through the operations center door at 2053. Hartley was standing, phone to his ear, still operating from the version of the situation that had been true that morning, speaking with the authority of a man who has not yet processed that authority is not the fixed thing he has always assumed it to be. He was explaining to someone that a security situation had been identified and contained, that the installation was secure, that the matter was being handled through proper channels. He saw her. He saw Briggs behind her. His voice lost 1 step, then found itself again. He said to the room, "She needs to be returned to holding immediately." 2 of his personnel started toward her, stopped as though they'd walked into a wall. Rear Admiral Park came through the main door. The operations center held 22 people. All 22 stopped. Not the polite stopping of a meeting interrupted. The total stopping of people who have spent their careers learning to read authority and have now encountered a quantity of it that has no familiar reference point. The 2 men who had started toward Chen stopped so completely that one of them left a foot suspended mid-stride. Behind Park, 4 generals in service dress, 3 federal agents with lanyards visible at the collar, 2 people who were positioned for the room, not for the conversation, stationed at angles that covered every exit without making it obvious they were doing so. A tablet hit the floor somewhere behind her. The sound cracked through the silence like a starting shot. The AC hum became the loudest thing in the room. A chair scraped. Someone exhaled as though they'd been holding it since she walked in. Hartley's phone call ended. The other party disconnected. He looked at Park. He looked at the generals. He looked at Chen, standing in the center of the room, unhurried, waiting. Not with the performance of patience, but with the actual thing, the structural thing, the version that doesn't need an audience. His face moved through its sequence. Confusion, the beginning of understanding, something below that which was colder and more personal. "Your sleeve," Briggs said, from where he'd positioned himself at the room's margin. She reached down and rolled the left sleeve 4 inches. She held her arm at the angle that allowed the room to see the inner forearm clearly. The tattoo was small and precise. A blade, the specific curved style of a classified insignia design. A compass rose at the pommel, rendered in a manner that was simultaneously decorative and functional, containing, if you knew the code, a 6-digit classification identifier. The design had been applied not by a tattoo artist, but by a field medic in a location that does not appear on public maps in 2018 as an identity marker for an operator whose service record had been reclassified above standard flag officer access after an operation that officially did not occur. General Torres, Joint Chiefs, the only woman in the arriving group, saw it first and went rigid. Her hand moved to her chest involuntarily and then stopped. Something passed across her face. Recognition, and underneath recognition, the weight of understanding what the recognition meant. The most senior general in the room raised his right hand. The motion was slow and specific, the motion of a man who has performed this 10,000 times and knows that this instance will be the one that remains. His hand rose to his temple, elbow level with his shoulder. The edge of his palm cut the air. He held it. The second general raised his hand. The third. The fourth. Torres last. And there was something in the angle of her salute that was different from the others. Not more correct, more chosen. Hartley stood with his hands at his sides. He could not raise his hand. For a long moment, he could not do anything at all. His face had stopped cycling and settled into something gray and distant and truthful. The expression of a man watching something arrive, that he has known, at some level beneath everything he has built on top of it, was always going to arrive. "For the record," Park said, and her voice carried to every corner, clear and formal and without drama. "The individual detained tonight holds classification designation Black Bear 2, Naval Special Warfare Command, Counterintelligence Division. Active covert deployment, authorization level above the clearance of every person currently on this installation." She paused. "Every person in this room, including myself, answers to her operational authority." Hartley raised his hand. His arm was not steady. His salute held for the required duration and dropped. He stood afterward with the particular stillness of a man who has understood something he cannot undo. The federal agents moved to both exits. One of them said Hartley's name, last name only, flat as a form, official as a court date. Hartley looked at them. He looked at the room. He looked at her. She was already looking past him. "Gerald Hartley," the agent said, "you are being detained pending charges, including unauthorized disclosure of classified operational intelligence, conspiracy to obstruct military justice, and accessory in connection with the deaths of 4 active-duty special operations personnel. You will be advised of your right to counsel through your chain of command." No speech, no ceremony. The kind of justice that arrives the way real things arrive. Not like lightning, not like a verdict, but like weather. Inevitable, thorough, and indifferent to the objections of the people it was always going to reach. The window in the Western Command office faced the water. She sat alone in the late quiet of the base, door open because she needed the air. The specific salt-heavy, generator-humming, gravel-over-concrete sound of a Pacific installation at night, which was different from every other kind of quiet in a way she had never been able to explain to someone who hadn't heard it. The Hawaiian sky had gone through orange and copper and deep purple, and arrived at the dark blue that sits just before a tropical night fully arrives, full of depth and distance, and the particular kind of peace that comes after something difficult is over. Her watch read 22:17. They told her to stay down where she belonged. They forgot that the place she belonged was above everything they could see. Briggs knocked at 2200. She said, "Come in." He stood in the doorway for a moment, in the posture of a man who has spent a long career learning to know when formality is required and when something else is needed, and has chosen the something else. "I should have said something earlier," he said, "when I first saw the grip." "You were right not to," she said. "It needed to happen the way it happened. Every official action he took built the case. If you'd intervened, he might have stopped." He nodded slowly, the nod of a man filing something away. "The 4 operators," he said carefully, leaving space for whatever she decided to give. "Their families will have accurate records within 30 days, she said. "That was the condition on which I accepted the deployment." He looked at that for a moment. Then he looked out the window at the same dark Pacific she was looking at. And they were quiet together, in the way people are quiet when they are both carrying something and have decided not to make it heavier by speaking it. "There are people," he said eventually, "who should know you exist." "Some already do," she said. He left. The base settled further into its night sounds. She sat with the window and the water and the particular quality of quiet that follows a thing being done. Silence is a weapon, too. She had known this for a long time. She had also known its opposite, that silence is what justice sounds like when it arrives exactly on schedule. Tomorrow would begin early. The mission file had been cleared and reopened with updated authorization and a broader operational reach. The personnel network Hartley had been running through his consulting firm had 11 of 14 nodes severed and documented, each one producing testimony and record. The remaining 3 required approach through different channels. 2 of them were domestic and had already been flagged to the appropriate field offices. The third was a face in a surveillance image. Rooftop in Beirut. Timestamp 2024. Position and posture suggesting formal training of a kind that left marks even when the person thought they were being casual. Trained observer. Military or intelligence background, or both. Standing exactly where a civilian would not think to stand, because the sight line from that position was not obvious unless you had been taught to look for it. She did not have a name yet. She had a face. She had a city. She had the stillness of someone operating from a position of patience, which meant they were waiting for something. And waiting for something meant there was still time. The watch on her wrist read 22:31. The Pacific moved in the dark beyond the window, vast and indifferent, and full of what had not yet surfaced. Tomorrow, Chen would begin finding out what that was. Every soldier carries a story that few ever hear. Listen with your heart. Thank you for staying and watching. Subscribe to MVP Stories for more.